All right, so David Pace, we're going to give our subject matter expert speech. Purpose of this speech is to inform everyone about my major, which is forensic psychology. The driving motivation for me personally getting into forensic psychology, one night we got a phone call from a family friend, distraught, wanting us to come over and help. And we didn't know what it was. My wife was closer to the family than I was. I was merely the chauffeur. Loaded up, drove the wife in the car over. We checked on the family. We arrived. There's 2 police officers outside. We'll go in. And the gentleman's daughter had been accosted, I won't say assaulted, but accosted by a family friend. There was definitely intent to assault, but we did not actually, there was no actual assault. She was able to fend him off and defend herself. That evening, my interaction with the family, interaction with the young girl that had experienced the incident, as well as the follow-up, hearing that the next step for her was dealing with a forensic psychologist, which is, basically meeting the same needs that I had tried to do in an amateur capacity the night before, sparked my interest in wanting to fill that role professionally for other people. My wife is actually here this evening listening to the speech, so that's it for audience. The other audience in my family, they're all about 11, 8, and 4, and they don't be quiet for long enough to listen to this. So, we all know at least one person has been affected by a crime, whether it's a violent crime, a sex crime, a hate crime, or just petty theft. All of these things can fall within the purview of a forensic psychologist. It's not just treating and counseling people. It's also helping to determine whether or not a criminal is fit to stand trial, an accused criminal is fit to stand trial. It's also trying to determine whether or not a convict has actually been rehabilitated and is ready to be released back out into the world. All of these things can be applied to someone with a degree in criminal psychology in some capacity. My credibility is I am now a sophomore, taking classes to get my degree in forensic psychology. Research that I've been going through with this program, 2 different sociology programs, a psychology program. Really enjoying the classes, ongoing study, and I'll be doing it for at least another 2 years, if not more, depending on how things go. Uses for a forensic psychologist. Section 1. Forensic psychologists tend to be victims of violent crimes or survivors of a violent experience. Maybe it's a violent crime. Maybe, certainly nowadays we see in the news constantly where there are crimes taking place. There are mass shootings on a scale hereto unprecedented. We've never seen this type of violence, at least not broadcast on the news. There are psychologists tending students in schools that weren't even directly related with school shootings because of the fear that they'll be next. Deciding the competency of someone to stand trial. Everyone's familiar with the insanity plea. Everyone always expects the next time there's a school shooting or a mass shooting, always going to try and plead insanity. That is where a gathering of experts, but as well as forensic psychologists, come in and they help to determine, as human lie detectors, help to determine, is the person actually competent, is the person shamming, based on a variety of different scientific methods to determine how accurate the person's being. Ask them to recount the experience repeatedly. Also, witnesses of the crime that the person's convicted of. Ask them to repeat repeatedly so that you can arrive at as close to a scientific determination as possible when you're using and relying on people. And then determining whether or not a convict is rehabilitated. Again, we've all seen movies. Movies are a poor substitute for reality. However, there are circumstances where someone goes in for 5 to 10 years, they come back out they have to be determined. Now, obviously, nobody's going to say, no, you know what, I think I have something else to learn. Put me back on the inside for a while. Let me see what's going on. Maybe I think I really need to figure out what's going on behind my eyes. No, everybody comes out, yes, warden, I am rehabilitated. Please put me back out on the street. And unfortunately, as we all know, far too often that person actually just goes back out and commits the same crime because they are institutionalized. That's what the news would be telling you. Again, here comes the warden, guards, witnesses to his character while he's been inside, but also there's going to be a forensic psychologist that can help to discuss with him, ask questions, and determine whether or not his responses are characteristic of someone who has actually been rehabilitated and is mentally stable, sound, and ready to return to society. Section 2 will go into the job hazards of a forensic psychologist. First one that we've all heard of, burnout. It happens in any job, but any time that you are pouring yourself into violent crimes, emotionally distraught relatives of the victim of a violent crime. It's not always just the person that was the subject of the violent crime, especially whenever there's a fatality. You're going to deal with the fallout, the direct relatives, parents of a child, offspring of a parent. You're going to have to counsel them, and you're going to see you're burning up so much time trying to do your very best that you overwork yourself. You end up having it's burnout. You're emotionally spent. You're like a candle burnt down to the base. There's nothing left. It can happen in anything, any career, but especially whenever we're talking about something that is you don't shut it off. 8 to 5 doesn't exactly work that easily in this line of work because there's no tools to lay down and put away, and you don't get the psychological separation as easily as something where it's a manual task and you can actually put your tools away, go home, and spend time with the kids. This stuff is predominantly psychological and mental, so that it's going to carry over into your personal life, similar to what you see with firefighters, EMS, police officers. All have the same type of burnout. Vicarious trauma. This is similar to burnout. It's closely related, all from the same citation, from preventing vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout in forensic mental health, forensic psychology as exemplar. All of that is by Drs. G. Pirelli, D.L. Foreman, and K. Maloney. Vicarious trauma. You're talking about psychologists that are dealing directly with violent accidents, be they highway accidents where they're dealing with survivors of a violent car crash, whether it's alcohol, substance abuse, reckless driving, or whether we're talking about people that are surviving a mass shooting, attempted rape, etc. Violent crime. The nature of being exposed to this abhorrent, violent activity repeatedly over and over, you start to see the effects of vicarious trauma where it carries over into their personality. They start to become desensitized and demoralized by continuous exposure. And finally, we're going to talk about compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue. We all have a heart. Some people's are buried a little bit deeper, but we all have a heart. We all care for those that are hurting. If we don't, we're sociopaths and we shouldn't be doing this line of work. But you see people with compassion fatigue when they constantly reach out, especially in dealing with young children, social services, where you're repeatedly exposed to just the most unthinkable circumstances, either children that have been abused, children that have been neglected, or children that have been orphaned. You see compassion fatigue. You're so often at the end of your rope, and you're pouring your heart out again, and you have nothing left to give. You're just leads to burnout at the end of the day. So, working environment is going to be kind of short and sweet. Looking at forensic psychology, correctional psychology, distinct but related subfields in psychological sciences and practices by Neil TMS, as well as, a very short introduction of forensic psychology by D.V. Cantor. There are a variety of different levels of experience, different education when it comes to any field of psychology. So you're going to have coworkers that have got greater experience, greater education level, and younger, less experienced, less educated employed coworkers. You may be working in a hospital, working counseling out of an ER, counseling family, or the survivors or the victims of crimes. You could be working through a school, like I said earlier, the effects of mass shootings and gun-related violence in schools, or you could be the police department dealing with officers that have had to discharge their weapons in the line of duty, or a fire department where you're dealing with firefighters that have either lost patients, or even if the patient survives, that mental trauma, the vicarious trauma, the compassion fatigue, and the burnout all still going to be very real things that they have to deal with. So you could be working in that firehouse. And then, of course, there's a correctional facility. Not only are you looking at trying to determine whether or not a convict has been rehabilitated, but you've also got the psychological welfare of all of from the warden to the lowliest keykeeper. Anyone walking a block, they've all got that institutionalized mentality, even though they're not technically locked in and they get to go home at 5 or 7 or whenever their shift ends. They're still locked inside that cell, that building, and they're walking around that little cement prison. So even though they're not locked in, there's still that institutional mentality, that us versus them, and they have to have an EAP, an employee assistance program, utilized as forensic psychologist that allows them to vent, someone to address their issues, and refer them to external counseling if necessary. We're going to be in every state across the world, every state, every major city, even some of the minor cities. Stillwater, Oklahoma, where I'm from, probably going to end up working out of there in some capacity. At the end of the day, I hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble on about forensic psychology, some of the things that interest me about it, some of the things I look forward to trying to do, and the impact that forensic psychologists have on the world in general. I know I ran a little bit over. I hope you can forgive me for that in the lesser than 2 people audience, but again, I'm not well liked, so I had to make my wife come in and do it. So the next time you hear about anybody that's been the survivor of a violent crime, a mass shooting, anything like that, know that there are a team of forensic psychologists waiting to hear help for them or for you. Thank you very much.